As Tori indicated, my name is Scott Mackey, and I'm here with Peter Duff. And yes, we do look an awful lot alike, so forgive that. I just realized we've actually been working together for over 20 years, so maybe that's why we look so much alike. I don't know. And we apologize to John because we didn't actually get his mug up on here, but he's going to do a great job with a demo later on. So anyway, that's what we look like. Some of you have met us, and if you haven't, we look forward to hopefully meeting you at some point in the future. From an agenda perspective, we've got a few things we want to get through. Talk a little bit about the market trends. So Peter and I will talk a little bit about that. We spend a lot of time working with customers and partners and speaking with analysts. So we've got some pretty interesting insights there. We won't be able to get into all of them, obviously, today. We'll give you a little bit of a hint. And then because some of you are existing customers, some are potentially new customers, I wanted to give you a little bit of Adlib history about how we got to this point, because some of you know us for potentially quite different solutions than what we're currently delivering, how we've actually evolved and expanded our market offerings. Talk a little bit about the Unstructured Content Challenge, dig into a little bit more about what we mean by better data and digital transformation. We do have some specific use cases and some business impact that we've seen from different customers that, as we share those with customers, we find that really useful, regardless of industry, kind of seeing what kind of impacts people are able to achieve with some of these technologies. We'll touch briefly on the product roadmap, and that's the kind of thing where if you're an existing customer, you can reach out to us, and we'd be happy to do a deeper dive at a later date, but give you a bit of a sense on where we're going. And then for those of you that don't really know much about Adlib, and even those of you that may have been with us for a while, just a quick who are we? You know, there might be some bits and pieces in there about who we are that you may not actually realize. And then do just a quick Q&A, as Tori indicated at the end. So as I mentioned, in terms of a little bit of history on Adlib, and those of you that have been with us for a while maybe know some of this, but you know, we've been around for quite a while, since the early 2000s, and coming from a place where Adlib was the de facto standard for basically taking any unstructured document type and creating accessible content from that. In a lot of cases, those existing customers, again, using us to create PDF, XML, searchable content essentially is where we came from. And working with big customers in different industries, but in particular life sciences, we refer to Pfizer here, really evolving the technology to the point where digging deep into that unstructured content was a reality. It was necessary for basically doing what we were doing. Evolving a little bit further, working with some big insurance companies, looking at more process automation types of workflows, not just about the automation of content conversion and publishing, but essentially doing things like digital mailroom and automating processes such as claims processes. Thank you, John, for moving that forward. And then evolving from there, essentially moving from the idea of taking any unstructured content format and normalizing that to an accessible format, we had to dig deep into all of this content. So understanding what was text, what was image, the document structure, the table structure, the hyperlinks, all of that internal information was really powerful knowledge to have that allowed us to do some more powerful things such as similarity analysis. So you could start to do some auto clustering of content based on the internals, not just surface level insights, but digging deep into the content so that you can start to cluster information based on its similarity, based on the content itself, and then do things like very targeted extraction of content. So working with some of the bigger banks on things like really complex contracts and extracting things like Party A, Party B, legal clauses, things that are very tough to extract from highly unstructured formats. If you think of contracts for that example, they may have a template today, but they've evolved over time. And you deal with multiple languages, you deal with multiple generations and multiple contract types. It's really important to actually leverage that deep internal awareness of the content structure itself to be able to do some of those powerful operations. Building on that as well, we've also incorporated a number of different technologies, including artificial intelligence, natural language understanding, machine learning. You know, those are buzzwords out there, but we actually apply these technologies, again, aimed at the process of classifying information better and doing better targeted extraction. The whole goal is creating clean, structured data from all of these complex, unstructured document formats. And some of you may have realized as well, or seen over the last few months, I guess it was probably last year that this was made public, that we've got some industry recognition from this as well, some analyst recognition. So we're in some of the Gartner reports, but Forrester actually had us as sort of the #3 vendor on the file analytics space in their WAVE report from last year. So some of the technology that we're using here is actually quite powerful and is getting some really strong recognition in the marketplace. So that just gives you a bit of background on sort of where we came from. So those of you that knew us from 10 years ago, we haven't abandoned that. We still do all of those things that you know and love us for, but we're expanding some of those use cases in really powerful and significant ways. So this next one, I wanted Peter to just talk a little bit about some of our, the industry observations. We got some industry quotes here, Peter, but how does this tie in with what you're hearing and seeing?
Yeah, so I mean, the trends in the industry are pretty interesting in terms of what's behind this move. And there's a lot of different technology adjustments that organizations are making and changes to their strategy. And the biggest trend behind that is really the move towards, started by big data, and then starts to migrate from a big data perspective into how do I become a digital business. And we've all seen the emergence of organizations that change fundamentally in the industry by being a digitally born business. And insurance and fintech and financial services companies in particular are looking to figure out how do they migrate from being that company that's been around since the early 1900s into a leading edge technology company that offers really amazing products to their customers. And so this digital transformation is becoming a strategic priority for them. They're starting to think about how do we become a digital business, how do we compete in the market effectively, how do we maintain our customer relations, and how do we make sure that we can offer new products and new services to customers so that we can keep them and offer a very rich experience to them. And so digital is one of the key drivers towards that, and most of the organizations globally are hiring data scientists or building out innovation teams and are thinking about how they migrate from sort of classic ways of doing business into the future, which is all about digital and all about information and leveraging that information in order to make more informed decisions, better decisions, and provide better products and services.
Yeah, and I guess we do see that, both Peter and I, when we're out there, and you've probably all experienced that. It seems to be all about data and automation, but there's a lot of it's a challenge, right, Peter? I mean, what are you seeing here in terms of the success of these digital transformation initiatives? Are there challenges there that you're sort of hearing about?
Well, absolutely. I think that the hype curve for some of these things is sort of entering that trough of disillusionment, I think, where organizations aren't getting what they expected to get out of some of these initiatives. They've made some steps forward, but in some cases they've also complicated things, and in other cases they've just found that they're unable to actually provide true end-to-end process automation of the things that they wanted to automate. And one of the really persistent trends in all of that is data, and it's all about good data. Using incomplete data to drive processes often stops dead and requires people to do things as part of the process. And as soon as you include people in the process, then delays happen, then errors happen, then information is miskeyed or misunderstood, and the expectation of what they wanted to get out of that process sort of halts in its tracks. And so the really persistent thing that we're seeing is that the data that they need is hidden from the solutions that they're implementing. And so that's where we feel that we've got a really interesting opportunity in the market to help supply that missing data, that hidden data, in a way that enables these processes to actually function and complete themselves and be truly end-to-end automated.
Yeah, and to support what Peter's saying, I continue to hear that, again, from customers, but also the analysts that are fielding calls from the market, essentially, that, whether you're talking about RPA, robotic process automation, or you're talking about the big insight engines or the analytics tools or even the workflow tools that are out there, data lakes, the data warehouses, contract intelligence or contract analytics solutions, all of them rely on clean, structured data to do their magic, essentially. And Adlib is sort of uniquely positioned to basically take any of that unstructured mess that organizations are dealing with and create that clean, high-quality data from it. I did want to point out a little bit, we often talk about unstructured content, structured content, and, we sort of live and breathe this stuff every day. But just to give you context about what we're referring to here, The stats are all over the place. There's still, whether it's 75% or 80%, it's all the stats that you look at, it's certainly north of 70% of an organization's content is unstructured. And what we're referring to there is your email, your Word files, your CAD drawings, your images, all of that unstructured content that might be in a repository. It's often spread across file shares, it's in email attachments, it's all over the place. And in that content lies a lot of value. The analytics engines, the RPA tools, all of these things are able to do their thing with structured data. In other words, data that's in a database, the name value pairs, its rows and columns. The real value and potential risk lies in all of that mess of unstructured content that people have got. So we'll talk a little bit more about that going forward. But when we talk about sort of the mix of value and risk, it really depends on who we're speaking with. Some of the use cases and drivers are related to extracting maximum value from their content, whether it's structured or unstructured. Others are related to risk. So if we start on the value side, maybe Peter, you can talk about risk, but from a value perspective, there's really important information, IP, insights about customers. There's a lot of value that's hidden in that unstructured content that if you're able to separate the wheat from the chaff, get rid of the rot, the redundant, obsolete, and trivial stuff, and focus on the things that matter, start to group them so that the similarities bring them together, and then extract the high-value elements from them, you can then leverage that data for all kinds of things, including intelligent insights. I mentioned the example before on process automation. If you look at most of these things are really on the ingestion side, so whether it's new customer onboarding or employee onboarding or claims processing, invoices, those are all the standard things that people think about on the ingestion side. There's all kinds of opportunities for process automation, and quite often there's an element of unstructured content that exists within those different workflows. So quite often these process automation initiatives will fail or stop because they're unable to pull clean data from that content so that they can fully automate a process from end to end. So by doing that, there's an opportunity to create some real value. The revenue opportunities here that we're referring to, again, vary by industry, but examples there might be in life sciences where you've got vast stores of content that have been created over the decades. There's valuable IP and research that's in there. It's hidden in there quite often. So there's new technology, there's new processes available that might be able to leverage that old legacy information. So being able to surface some of that is a real opportunity for revenue. A more prominent example might be the whole know your customer for insurance and banking in particular, where if you've got insight into all of the information you've got on a customer, both the structured and unstructured, you're able to proactively identify new opportunities to deliver a product or service to them that A, delights the customer, but B, is a new revenue opportunity for you as an organization as well. So again, it varies by industry, but those are some simple examples, I guess, of value. If we move over to risk, Peter, do you want to talk about some of those?
Absolutely. Yeah, so the risk is sort of the scary side of this slide. And, the problem fundamentally exists because of the way that content has accumulated in organizations over the years. And it's, people have done, a lot of hard work to try and put systems and processes in place in order to store content in a way that allows it to be accessed and understood. The truth of it is that, there's been a lot of challenges with actually implementing those in an effective way. And so, I'm pretty certain that if you asked almost any organization if they feel like their data stores are clean, the answer would be no. We don't really know where everything is. We've migrated systems, we've discontinued systems, we have file shares, we've got SharePoint, we've got the creation of content in the wild, and, and then regulations happen. And when regulations happen, numerous years after you started to store your content, then you've got this problem of saying, where are the content types and the content attributes stored that allow me to understand what my exposure is for things like, PII. Do I know where all my documents are for PII? If there was a data breach, would I know what I lost and would I know how to remediate it? New regulations like GDPR coming on board mean that organizations have a higher duty to understand where that information is stored. And the problem is that it's often stored on scanned images, it's stored on paper, but it's also, even if it's stored in electronic formats, it's still not easily accessible and still not easily understood, the scope of their exposure. And then, of course, in banking, there's numerous regulations related to trading related to KYC, related to anti-money laundering, and insurance, understanding what your exposures are related to policies and things like that. All of that information is stored in data, stored as data inside unstructured content that's predominantly inaccessible. And so that creates a risk situation that is really hard for organizations to understand and manage.
Thanks, Peter. So, a lot of what we've talked about when we look at all the different use cases across industries tend to fall into one of three main categories. When we talk about fueling innovation, enhancing experiences, simplifying compliance, it's a little bit of that value versus risk type of conversation. But the fueling innovation is what I was describing before, where if you can tap into all of that information, that IP, that knowledge that you've got in your content, whether it's structured or unstructured, there's opportunities for you to actually illuminate potential new product or service offerings, and that will vary. Again, in oil and gas, it might be being able to leverage research that was done 20 years ago to actually create a profitable new project. For banking, it's about new products and services for customers. For life sciences, it might be about leveraging research that was done previously to actually deliver a new product to the market. Enhancing experience is a big push. Obviously in insurance, it's not just insurance, but everybody is all about creating the best possible customer experience. And we usually actually put this in two ways. One is internal experience. If you can automate things, you're going to improve the experience for your internal knowledge workers. But quite often, the bigger external driver here is that improved customer experience at the outside. So banking customers or insurance customers, those are who are driving competitive differentiation in the market. So there's lots of born online startups that are really providing some competitive pressure to some of the legacy vendors that are out there or companies that are out there. So being able to automate and personalize those customer journeys, accelerating response times all through automation is driven by technology powered by the data underneath. So we see time and again that the break or the pause, the hiccup in that full realization of the value is getting data from unstructured content. It's not all legacy. There's content being created every day as part of a business as usual process that you want to be able to tap into to help enhance those experiences or drive that innovation. Peter, you want to talk a little bit about the compliance side? You were sort of dealing with risk there on the previous one.
Yeah, of course. The impact of being able to automate some of these things means that you can store metadata about documents that contain information that's pertinent to regulators. And if you store that metadata in a way that allows you to query across it, then you can actually respond to regulators' requests for, are you compliant to this particular initiative? Are you compliant to this regulation? Show us how you have stored your information to enable you to respond to different sort of audit situations. And, being able to automate that data and the extraction of that data means that these processes can be set up and executed across legacy content, but then also set up as a business as usual go-forward approach. And the really fun challenge, of course, is when the regulators change the regulations. Sometimes on an annual basis, you have to go back and rescan that information and pull that information out and store it again in a way as metadata that allows you to respond to their requests and their submission requirements. So it's a really important thing to actually think about how to set up automation in order to prepare yourself for compliance so that it doesn't cost you a lot in terms of time to prepare reporting or, in the worst case, millions and billions, as we've all seen, dollars in fines when the regulators say you're not in compliance and you don't have control of your data.
Keep the company out of the headlines, absolutely. We mentioned GDPR in here, but obviously California Consumer Protection Act, there's all kinds of regulations coming out related to some of this. It's not all about PII, there's other kinds of compliance requirements that people have, but again, from a use case perspective, that's sort of the bucket that we see some of those things falling into. This next slide is just a little bit of a deeper dive. I mean, John's going to show you the actual product or pieces of the product in a bit, but this kind of highlights a little bit about what Peter and I have been talking about. On the left, all of the unstructured content, basically following through a process where you need to identify what you've got in the first place. You need to start to classify and extract information. Those of you that have been customers for a long time know us for our ability to standardize or convert content, make non-searchable content searchable to create really high-quality results. Some of the other document composition and publishing operations, all of these are things that you can do to your unstructured content with the result being, as you move to the right, increasing levels of intelligence and automation by leveraging the structured data that you're creating from your complex unstructured documents. And the combination of the two, at the top we're talking about unstructured, and at the bottom we're talking about structured. You bring those together, and that's what's driving the overall value for the company in the end. This we talked about a little bit earlier, or touched on, but I wanted to put this slide in because it kind of highlights, it emphasizes some really important things that the customers we've spoken to have responded to as well. There's all kinds of different solutions that your organizations are deploying to solve the different business problems that you've got. So whether you're using RPA, the robotic process automation, whether you're leveraging an insight engine, content services, business intelligence, the business process management, these are all different ecosystems of vendors. And I've actually gone and listed a few examples here just to give you some context. If you're talking RPA, the Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, those kinds of vendors. From an insight engine, you've got your Watsons from IBM. Content services are your traditional vendors around OpenText and IBM Highland, and then you've got Tableau and Qlik, and you've got Pegasystems and K2. You've probably got a mix of these different technologies, but they kind of all start at the data. They can do some really wonderful things, but if they can't tap into that rich trove of data and content from your unstructured stores, they can't realize their full potential, essentially. So this is where we see a lot of our customer use cases and partner discussions going, is that the data that we're able to create from basically anything is helping to feed some of the value that they're looking to get from some of these different ecosystems, which again is driving some of those business values across the top.
So I was go back one slide. I was down at the Gartner show, the Gartner Big Data and Analytics show a little while ago in Florida. And, in walking the floor and talking to a lot of the different vendors down there, many of them start at data and do amazing things with the data. They report it, they amalgamate it, they do analytics on it, they automate processes, but they all start at data. And their effectiveness of their solutions really is limited by access and quality of the data that they ingest. And, the positioning of Adlib, as Scott was describing, is that, our job is to dip deeply into that unstructured content and present back the data that any of these industries can actually leverage in order to provide a more complete end-to-end solution. And that's one of the things that is holding back digital business, and that's one of the things that Adlib brings to the table to help solve.
This next one I'm just going to put up very quickly because I want to move on so that we can get John to actually do the demo. But in terms of what we're talking about, the sort of path to better data, it's not always following these exact steps from 1 through 6 necessarily, but obviously you want to start with what have I got out there, right? So from a discovery perspective, being able to scan and crawl different systems and repositories so that what have I got out there in terms of duplicate content? What are the different formats and document types that I've got? Being able to understand that and then feeding that into different workflows where you can normalize the content, make sure that everything is searchable, do operations such as the automated classification of content, the auto tagging of content, and then doing some targeted extraction from that content for the different business drivers that you've got at the other end. So part of what you'll see from John, we'll touch on a few of these different steps within here, but wanted to give you a bit of a picture on a rough path to better data that we talk about when we're starting to describe the Adlib products. But I did want to, before John does his demo, wanted to go through a couple of use cases here. And I think, Peter, I wanted to get you to talk to this first one here. This was related to oil and gas in particular.
Sure. So oil and gas companies are, fascinating organizations and almost organisms, really, where they're highly distributed, and each of them have, many properties around the world. And as they have those properties, they, develop them, they build things, they own them, they put assets on them, they drill holes in them, they try and extract data, they take measurements, they have all kinds of reports related to each asset. And much of that information is created in the wild and stored on site with the asset, and then, almost like a dump truck backing up to the door, the documents are delivered back to head office, and the dump truck tips up and the documents are delivered, and then, the dump truck drives away, leaving head office with, a lot of information that's really challenging to go through. And, it may not be always as dramatic as that, but, sometimes it's a really interesting visualization. So the challenge is that organizations want to stage their properties so that they can, A, manage them really effectively at a low cost, or B, prepare them for sale once they understand exactly what's inside them. So sort of like staging your house for sale, you know, oil and gas companies need to stage their properties and assets potentially for sale or for, you know, low-cost operation. And having the information available at their fingertips is extremely important, and making sure that they use the right data. They, you know, don't have information that's not useful or not valid. And in many instances, some of this data is extremely old and needs to be metadata tagged and stored in a way that allows them to understand what they've got from an asset perspective based on tests that they ran many years ago. So this was a project that we've worked on over the years to help numerous oil and gas companies get prepared for this. And, you know, we've had some incredible savings in terms of operational savings as well as processing savings in order to prepare them for understanding and having good data.
Great, thanks. This next one I actually touched on a little bit earlier, but it's related to that automation of the claims processing. So it's kind of that upfront ingestion of claims. And essentially, in insurance, you've got to deliver that best possible customer experience, or else some of these new digital upstarts are going to eat your lunch, essentially. So we had a customer that basically had that disjointed process, and for a customer to file a claim, it was taking days to get a response back. And by plugging in the right technologies and getting access to that unstructured content and removing some of those manual steps, automating the extraction and then validation of different policy information, recognizing that they had coverage, that it fit within the parameters, and that you could automatically approve, meant that they were able to shorten the processing time from days to hours, and in some cases minutes. So we talk here about sort of the millions of dollars saved in terms of the time that they saved per document, accumulated over time, $6 million a year in terms of savings to the organization as a measurable one. What's a little less measurable, but is almost more important, is the bottom part of the under the $6 million there, where we talk about accelerated customer response times from days to hours. So when you look at customer retention and customer experience, it's a little hard to measure, but it's got a huge impact on the overall bottom line. So in this case, it was around taking that relatively disjointed manual process and automating it as much as possible. We'll never suggest you can do it 100%, but as volumes grow and as customer bases grow, the larger the percentage that you can automate and just deal with exceptions, things that don't fit the data, the criteria, the validation, the better you're going to be positioned to grow and excel in future. So that was sort of the claims automation. That's more of an insurance example. This next one, Peter, is related to insurance as well, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah, so this is a large reinsurance company that we've been working with for a number of years. And the challenge in reinsurance, of course, is, you know, you're relying on the insurer to actually do a good job in, you know, providing an effective and cost-effective policy with a minimal of risk. And so you're reinsuring policies from organizations around the world, and you're reinsuring them. And, you know, the thing that impacts risk related to some of these policies are, you know, things like financial conditions in different countries, you know, weather events, things like that. And this company didn't have any way of understanding their underwriting risk globally in real time. You know, they had hundreds and hundreds of contracts, thousands, millions of contracts, you know, ingested into the organization. And so what they've decided to do is they've decided to take all of that content, scan it, image it, extract the relevant information, and load that information into IBM Watson so that Watson can provide real-time risk assessments based on current world political, geopolitical, weather conditions to help this company understand what their risk is in real time. And that kind of thing is really incredible in terms of its effectiveness and its ability to provide and deliver meaningful data to the organization.
Thanks. This last one is related to another customer onboarding type of example, and it was an opportunity basically to automate the processing of you know, over 24,000 policies per month. You can imagine the amount of time that would take if trying to do that manually. So it was really about both the customer experience, but also just operational efficiency benefits. You know, they definitely wanted to deliver the best possible experience, but in analyzing how many hours could possibly be returned to the business if they were able to automate certain steps, it was deemed significant, right? And this isn't necessarily rocket science, but with the appropriate application of people, process, and technology, you can achieve some pretty great things. And this is just one, phase one of a multi-phase set of use cases for a customer. But you can imagine the savings that are associated with being able to automate processing of 24,000 document onboarding exercises per month. It can obviously be very significant. So the focus here was a little bit more on operational efficiency than customer experience, but obviously there's a little bit of both in this particular example. So that's enough of Peter and I talking. Let's actually hand this over to John. He can actually maybe show you a little bit more about what the actual technology does, give you a little bit of an insight into that. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Scott. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce anyone new on the phone to our Adlib Elevate platform, and to be able to showcase some of the capabilities that both Peter and Scott have been speaking about this afternoon. So as we get this loaded up and we log into Adlib Elevate, we'll see that Elevate is truly a platform that we've built to enable multiple different applications and usage. So obviously covering all of the use cases that Peter and Scott had mentioned, but also being able to extend this to use with our partners, our customers, to be able to plug in additional applications into our platform as well. So it can all be managed by one central process. In this case, we've got our Vision console that enables us to essentially log in and manage the system, so create our workflows and check out logging and everything, be able to see the status of jobs as they're going through the system. But for today, we're going to focus on our Identify and Classify product, which is really our discovery tool to enable us to gain insights into the dark data or the unstructured data that's been mentioned throughout the course of this webinar. So as we log in, we'll see that there's a number of files here, and essentially what we've done is we've gone out and crawled specific locations to, while keeping the files in place, pull back metadata and information about the content so we can get a brief understanding about the data that's stored within our unstructured data shares. So some initial things like the date created as well as date modified of the content, but then being able to go a little bit deeper and determine exactly what type of content is contained within the data shares, and doing that in an intelligent way. So not just taking a look at file extensions or anything and trusting that a DOC file is actually a Word document or a zip file is a zip file. Oftentimes, files can be renamed to get through security protocols and things like that. So we'll intelligently identify exactly what type of content that is and be able to report and give you some details into what type of data you have within your shares. And so we could be crawling out to any number of file shares or locations across your organization to find this dark data, or potentially even things like your SharePoint sites and OpenText or Documentum repositories, really be able to plug into any store that you have any of your unstructured data. Some further analytics that we might do is to be able to start getting into the rot analysis of content. So determine that redundant, obsolete, or trivial content, as indicated here by unique file types, files that might just be empty content, as well as any duplicate content as well. And within the platform, we've got the ability to have different libraries. So you can have users logging in with different roles that might have access to different types of content. So I'll switch over to our financial repository here, or library, and you can see that also any of these options and data points within here are clickable so that we can go in and instantly take a quick look at whatever data we have within those different charts. So in this case, we're looking at the duplicate content. So Adlib's automatically run a process to find duplicate content, exact duplicates based on all of the data within this file share. We've automatically flagged them as secondary so that we know that there is also a primary out there, and we've got a full audit trail and traceability to identify what the content is related to. So you always know and have a reference point as to where your duplicate content exists. We've also got the ability to create different views, and this enables you to really just slice and dice the data in different ways so that you can start working with it as you identify your rot or find any of your legacy content that you want to archive. we can create a view that's going to separate that content and enable us to either quarantine data or potentially send it off to another workflow so that we can archive it to PDFA, maybe make it searchable for sure with our OCR, and then pass it off to your long-term storage vault that might be a different system within your organization. For now, we're going to take a look at our fingerprint view, and this is really taking a look at the rest of the data within this financial library that is not just deemed to be any rot. So we've removed all the duplicate content and whatnot, and we've got a number of files within here. And we can see that we've got success on the fingerprint content, meaning that we've already run that fingerprinting. And what that means is we've gone through our process of standardizing, OCRing the content, as well as running our content flow and our unique IP related to generating a fingerprint that allows us to group documents that would be similar into their own clusters of data. And so now to show you exactly what that means, we can select all of the files within this data set and go through. We've got different levels of workflows that we can run. So we've got some data extraction workflows that we can run, and we've got some classification workflows that we can run. We've already done the fingerprinting, so now we're just going to cluster this content. And so as we kick that off, as I mentioned, now it's looking at the fingerprint of all the files within here, and it's going to be generating similarities or analyzing the similarities of the content and putting them together in specific clusters. So if I go and switch our view now to take a look at our contract analysis view, this is going to give us some insight into the data and show us the specific clusters that the content belongs into. And right now what we're doing is we're just defining that. You can see this column here by the cluster ID. So what we've done is we've grouped all these similar documents into one cluster, signified by the number 1. And what we can do to quickly validate that is double-click and open up the file to see exactly what that looks like. And in this case, we can see there's a transportation agreement. If we go through the next file, we're able to go through, and so now we're looking at everything that's grouped to be cluster 1, and we see that the content is all very similar. Just to show the difference, if we do go into cluster 2, I'll open up one of these and we'll see that these are very different files. So these are settlement dispute forms. And what we've done is pulled these all together. And again, this is an automated algorithm that runs to uniquely identify these content as being similar to each other. So now what we want to do is, now we've gotten a general idea of what similar content is, we can decide if we want to run workflows against everything and just try to extract some specific information. In this case, I'm just going to target our first group of content, and we're going to run a workflow against that to extract information and start doing some real analysis on the content itself to be better used for potentially downstream processes. So I'll just kick off this contract analysis workflow under our data extraction category, and what that's going to do is run across and run some rules. In this case, we're going to look and try and define the document type as we would see fit for this type of content, and we're going to look at the operational imbalance. What we want to find out is if these specific contracts include an operational imbalance clause, and if it does, we also want to know if it has standard terms. So we expect standard terms to be present. If it's not standard terms, that might be something that we want to flag within our system, that they're not standard, and then we want to determine what is the tolerance level, imbalance level, and really dig deep into a specific clause of the contract to find that information. So if I just refresh our view here, now that I've kicked off that workflow, we can see that this has all been defined. We've defined our document type for the content as transportation agreement specifically. We're able to quickly see that whether the operational imbalance clause exists within the content, and the majority of them it does, except for these last two, and then whether they have standard terms or not. So when we see the standard terms, we can see the tolerance level, the imbalance measurement are all the same value, and once we get into non-standard terms, we can see the values are different. So these are digging right into a specific clause of the contract where we're extracting that information out. And as we see other value in the contract and other things that we can pull out of that, we're also grabbing things like the Party A and Party B information, a contract number. So we've got a very specific way of being able to go in, or a very dynamic way, I should say, of going in and grabbing this information regardless of where it sits within the contracts. And after we've extracted this information, we can now output that, and whether we're tying into an RPA process specifically, we can now pass this information onto an RPA process to make it more intelligent. And you see what we've done is exported this information to another folder where we've got all of our outputted fully OCR PDF files, as well as an XML document that we can now use to either use for ingestion into another ECM or repository, or pass off to potentially an RPA tool to take this information and make their automation processes even smarter and more intelligent as they run through those steps.
I guess what you're showing us here is a little bit of the behind-the-scenes work. Ideally, once you've got these things configured and you understand the different doc types that you're trying to extract data from, these all become automated processes.
Exactly.
So it runs in the background and you're feeding your different tools, whether it's RPA or an insights engine, but the whole idea is that there are still going to be exceptions, so this allows those to get streamed off and dealt with separately, and you either train the system to deal with new content types, or it updates the models, things like that, so that it can do a better job the next time around.
Exactly. This is sort of that first pass to be able to understand that information and do it. Like you said, it would be typically just all behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks, John.
All right, we'll pass it back to Scott to continue on with the presentation.
All right, thank you, John. And just recognizing the time, we're at 44 minutes past, so I'm not going to speed it up too much. We don't have too much more content to go through, but we do want to get to the questions if there are any. This next image here is really just a little bit of a different view into what we're talking about. John showed some of this before, but the whole idea here is that on the left side, the content is coming in from all kinds of different locations, right? So whether it's watch folders or SharePoint, or in this case we've got Snowflake and Box and Blue Prism, there's different sources essentially that you can draw the content from. We're going through that process of data discovery and then creating this better data through a combination of approaches, right? You're converting documents to make it searchable and accessible. You're doing the document classification. You're doing some capture. You're doing the data extraction, all of which is aimed at creating that better data, the little boxes you see there on the far right, that can then be fed back to those different systems and repositories. It doesn't have to be the same, right? You might be pulling from one and feeding to another. Some of the projects, we didn't talk about this use case earlier, but content migration, getting stuff from existing file shares and repositories up into the cloud. Instead of just lifting and shifting, there's an opportunity to actually clean up and enhance that content, enrich the metadata, for example. So if you're moving it from an on-prem scenario to a cloud, that's just another example of the kinds of things that you can do to basically automate and enrich your data as you're going through the different steps. And we were highlighting just a couple of different things here. Everybody uses these buzzwords, but I just wanted to emphasize that what we're introducing here, and this is the evolution of Adlib over the last several years, is introducing things like natural language understanding and machine learning, leveraging AI models, doing computer vision and deep learning algorithms. All of these things are aimed at some of what you saw John revealing, which is that ability to intelligently cluster information and then extract valuable data from wherever it exists in the content. It goes beyond just templated extraction. We're talking about actually analyzing the content, and regardless of where it exists, being able to find it and extract it. And then this whole idea of continuous learning, so that it can automate more and more, a higher and higher percentage of the content flowing into your organization. And as it gets smarter, you can increase that percentage, essentially. And then the whole idea that it is a platform. So Adlib has always been about integrating very easily with multiple systems, but also being able to tie into other technologies. So there's a lot of really cool open API type things that are coming out there. We've got some really interesting stuff related to artificial intelligence and some of the modeling, but there's other stuff out there. But the idea is that we've got that scalable platform, enterprise-level platform, that you can easily tie those things into and just build them into an Adlib workflow and be able to leverage all of those different capabilities. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of those things in terms of what the Elevate platform is capable of. So it's really all about delivering greater access to high-quality data in the most efficient way. That's really sort of what it boils down to. Aiming everything at better data. So for those of you that know us for basically taking any format and creating that clean, those really high-quality PDF, we've always been about creating high-quality accessible content, whether it's PDF or now we're talking about structured data from those unstructured documents. You can still obviously create PDF content and all the things that you know us for, but now we've gone far beyond that so that we can help power some of these other initiatives that organizations are deploying for their digital transformation that everybody is taking on. So quickly from a roadmap perspective, you've seen some of these things in what, maybe they were inferred more, I guess, by what you saw from John. Obviously, having this stuff run as a cloud-based service is something that we, along with everybody else, are doing, right? Being able to deploy this either on-prem or in the cloud is something that you'll be able to do. The business process orchestration at the bottom is really speaking to the workflow builder that we've got. That allows you to coordinate and orchestrate all those different processes. So you've got different types of content that you want different processes being performed on them, different kinds of data you may want extracted. This allows you to build some of those orchestrated workflows within the Adlib platform. Some of the AI-related capabilities aimed at PII detection, that was easy to say, is one of the things that we've got planned for upcoming releases. We've got a powerful new workbench capability that's really aimed at the data scientists in your organization, or if you've got partners that you work with. But it's really around their ability to do the analytics on the content, do the machine learning, train the system, and do some really powerful deep exploration if you want to go beyond some of the package models that come with the platform. And then in the bottom left, obviously, there's a host of new connectors. As has always been the case with Adlib, you can basically connect with anything, through web services and folders, and there's different ways to do it. But we do want to have a growing list of out-of-the-box connectors that are available. So depending on the systems that you've got, we probably can connect to it or will be able to connect to it soon. So that's really the roadmap content. And just quickly, as I mentioned, for those of you that don't know Adlib too well, but even those of you that have been with us for a while, we mentioned off the top that we've had some recognition from Forrester and Gartner. We actually put the Forrester quote in there, which was kind of interesting because it's in their words, basically. The idea that, Adlib as a file analytics vendor now, firms should shortlist Adlib if things like complex files are the focus, or if they want to use artificial intelligence, natural language processing, or data extraction in their analysis projects. So that's really what we're doing, sort of evolving, not away from what we've always done, that is still there, but adding more and more power to the platform so our customers can actually get more and more value from it. And then on the right, obviously, a list of different customers. We deal with a variety of industries. Obviously, the most content-intensive ones are in insurance, banking, pharma, and med devices, as well as oil, gas, and energy. But we've got a range of customers and partners in different industries as well. And the bottom line is everybody is trying to become some variation of a digital business. So everybody is undergoing digital transformation to one extent or another. And we can help them do that with this approach to basically untapping or unlocking the high-quality structured data from their unstructured document formats. Any last-minute thoughts, Peter, from you before we wrap things up? Or?
I think as you can see, we've put a lot of thought into some of the key trends in the market, building out an extensible platform that applies to many different use cases to support the real pain that organizations feel in getting the most out of their digital business. And we're really excited to continue the conversation with any of you folks on the line after we sign off today.
Yeah, so hopefully you learned a little bit more, not only about what Adlib is doing, but what some of the other people in different industries are doing to actually solve some pretty complex problems and some of the real benefits that they're getting from it. So if you've got any questions, we've got some for the webinar here, obviously, but if you do have others, we'd encourage you to visit the website. There's also whybetterdata.com you'll see on there, which has an interactive version of that original company timeline and some other cool stuff, some animation and video there that will help paint a clear picture. And certainly reach out to us at any point. We'd be happy to give you a little bit more insight into what we're doing.
We've got about 9 minutes left if anyone kind of on the line wants to ask any questions now in relation to the presentation as well. So we can give you a minute or two to type those in, and then we're happy to tackle a couple.
Sounds good.
Cool, great. I've got one question here, so I'll field it probably over to you, Scott. It says, the workflows and engines used in file analytics sound a lot like robotic process automation. Is Adlib moving kind of in the RPA vendor space?
Yeah, we touched on that, I guess, throughout the session. So, we get the question sometimes, are you guys an RPA vendor? It's a funny question, and Peter and I have debated this a little, and maybe he'll debate me now, but the fact is we've been in process automation since the beginning, right? If you think about what we've done, even back in the days when all we did, taking all that content and automating the creation of high-quality PDF, that was all being done manually before. So these are all processes that were manual before, and we've automated them to a great extent. People doing millions of files a day that had to be done manually before. But this new sort of somebody mentioned the hype cycle earlier, it might have been Peter. RPA has gotten all the buzz, and it's a little bit of a joke because Peter talks about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, he was doing some of the RPA stuff when you talk about the click automation, right? It's basically just mimicking what people do on their computer and just teaching a bot to do the same thing. That's a little bit simplistic, and we hear all the time that with the user adoption, the user frustration is growing because that's very brittle. It falls down pretty quickly. So there's a more fundamental opportunity to automate the process, the underlying process, without just automating the clicks. Mm-hmm. So to a certain extent, we could be considered RPA in some ways. But
well, I think the other thing that organizations are finding is that their RPA-enabled processes, there's some low-hanging fruit that they can take advantage of. However, again, back to some of these processes, as soon as the process involves a document that a human needs to read, then the process sort of falls over at that point. And often there's a requirement for somebody to look at the document, read it, and type information in. And so this is where Adlib has been integrated into RPA workflows to do the extraction of the really challenging information in order to automate those processes so that it can be a complete end-to-end process as opposed to a process that stops and requires human intervention.
Great. I've got one other question here too. Actually, I think this ties in nicely. So it just said we hear these buzzwords a lot too, but AI, robotic process automation, and machine learning are kind of moving beyond the theoretical in terms of being deployed and becoming more practical. Do we maybe we want to talk a bit more about some of the initiatives we have around AI deployment or anything that we have in test?
Talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So, AI, of course, is a huge buzzword these days, as Tori said. And, it's, in terms of how it can be deployed, is really one of the key things that we've thought very deeply about. We're using AI so that we can train the machine and train the models from real live data in order to get the very best results that we can get, but also have the ability to tailor the product very easily from one use case to another, from one document set to another, simply by retraining the AI models. And that's a really fundamental shift in terms of how you can deploy technology, because you don't have to code rules, you don't have to change programming code, you don't have to release software, you simply have to retrain the model. And so what you get is an extremely flexible product deployment, plus you also get a very highly repeatable process that can be trained and improved over time, again, without coding or without anything other than updating models and introducing new attributes to the system.
Awesome. I think that's it. I'm good for questions now. I think we'll probably give people 5 minutes back. But if anyone does have any other kind of questions outside of this or anything in relation to the demo itself, anything maybe more specific for John, happy to field those over. If you want to just reply back to the email, the info@Adlib Software is fine, and we'll get those over to the team. But wanted to thank everyone for joining. Thanks to everyone in the room, obviously John, Scott, Peter, for the presentation today. And we hope, obviously, everyone kind of takes something away from it, and we will provide a recording out to everyone, too, if you would like to, watch anything or go back and review. So that's it. Thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, everybody.